This last week I've been playing my Bleeding Concoction Pathfinder. I'm currently level 91, and I was inspired to start after I got a little lucky by corrupting one of my Widow Hail bows. Had a limit breaking 269% roll in it, not the best but certainly build enabling. Then it was off to the character creation screen and this Pathfinder was born. I leveled up this Pathfinder by using Lightning Rod plus Galvanic Shards until I finished the second trial and got my second Ascendancy point. Then I swapped over to Bleeding Concoction for the rest of the campaign. If you want to see that process, I made a little leveling guide that details what I used to make the early campaign quick and easy for me. I'll have it linked in the description. Also, while you're down there, hit the subscribe button for me. I really appreciate it. For those of you who are unaware about concoctions, I'll explain how this build works. It revolves around the Ascendancy node for Pathfinders called Brew Concoction. You're able to select one of 5 concoction spells to use: Poisonous for Chaos, Fulminating for Lightning, Shattering for Cold, Explosive for Fire, and lastly, Bleeding for Physical, which is what I'm using here. It's probably one of the least popular options tied with Explosive Concoction from what I've seen at the moment. But something that all concoction builds have in common is they use a combination of the Widow Hail Crude Bow, which I talked about earlier, and a quiver that has +2 to the level of projectile skills, plus an increase in bow skill damage. At the moment, scaling skill level is the best way to scale the damage of concoction builds. This is because concoction skills are unarmed skills. They have their own base damage, which is based off the skill level. They don't use your actual weapon damage. Bleeding Concoction doesn't use mana to cast. It uses 3 mana flask charges per cast instead. This means for resource management, we either aim to have a large pool of mana flask charges to do what we want to do before we run out, or have a replenishing pool of mana flask charges or something in between. I'll talk about how we manage our mana flask charges later on. Additionally though, Bleeding Concoction always bleeds the target it hits and has 100% more magnitude of bleeding baseline. A quick summary of how bleed works. Bleed is a physical damaging element. It has a default magnitude of 15% of the physical damage of the hit and a default duration of 5 seconds. So if you do multiple hits, the bleed will be the largest hit that was hit that applies to bleed, and that bleed will not be overwritten unless there is a stronger bleed that is being applied. This also means bleeds don't stack. However, bleeds can be aggravated. This is kind of a change of state of the bleed, in which the bleeding will do 100% extra damage. You can aggravate bleeding on a target by default by getting the target to move while bleeding, and there are some other methods which I'll detail on later with how we do it. Since Bleeding Concoction is a skill you get from your Ascendancy, it doesn't interact with the normal gem system. Bleeding Concoction will level up with your character and gain links with your character. And at level 90, you get a level 20 Bleeding Concoction with 6 links. Currently for me, Bleeding Concoction is at 260k sheet DPS at the moment. I have 23% crit chance and a 1.7 meter explosion radius and a 580% damage bonus. There aren't that many options you can use for support gems. Firstly, we'll start with Scattershot. Scattershot we run because with the multiple projectiles, the area will overlap and you can have multiple projectiles hit the same target. Next, we'll use Brutality for more fizz damage, Physical Mastery for an extra level to the skill, Martial Tempo to smooth out gameplay. Attack speed is funny and a bit of a balancing act. A quick pros and cons for attack speed. It does smooth out gameplay and it does help with our map clear and also our physical hit DPS. But it does greatly increase how many mana flask charges we burn through. And it also doesn't help that much with our bleed DPS. Lastly, we'll use Magnified Effect for mapping, or we'll use Long Shot for bosses. Next up is Vulnerability. This is a curse that is applied after a delay, and it causes hits against cursed enemies to ignore a flat amount of armor. We want this to be as high level as possible because the higher the level, the more armor we will ignore. I run this with Persistence for more skill effect duration, so it lasts longer, and Mobility for quality of life. Next, we use Eye of Winter. We use Eye of Winter to inflict critical weakness, and mainly just for bosses. We rarely use it when mapping, unless you run into quite a beefy rare mob. Run this with Unleash, so you save some globals and you're not applying like 3 or 4 in a row. You'll just shoot out 3 at once. Arcane Tempo for increased cast speed, and Inspiration for a reduced mana cost. Next, we run Grim Feast. Grim Feast is BIS at the moment for any energy shield build. For those who don't know, Grim Feast is a persistent buff that costs 30 spirit, and it allows you to pick up these little ghosts on the ground from mobs that you slay, and they allow you to recover your energy shield. But it also allows you to overflow your maximum energy shield to pretty much double. Next, I'm running Wind Dancer for a little bit of evasion, plus a knockback for when a mob hits you. I'm running with Blind and Maim. Next, we're running Alchemist Boon when bossing mainly, running with Herbalism and Precision. And when mapping, we'll turn off Alchemist Boon and put on Herald of Ash for mapping, and that just adds a little explosion, which helps with our AoE and clearing. Sniper's Mark is completely optional. I was trying to involve it earlier on when figuring out the build, but it's just too many things to cast early on. You can run it if you'd like. I kind of just forgot about it and stopped using it, but it is an option there. For gear, I estimate the total cost of everything I have at about 4 to 6 divines, which isn't crazy for a second character, but it's certainly not cheap. I would say you could have a setup at about half the power of what I've got now for about the 60 to 80 exalt range, possibly. I'm not too sure. I haven't actually tried to get a real budget version of this going, but I don't really see why not. The main sort of thing holding you back would be getting a decent Widow Hail. So yeah, this is certainly recommended for more of a second character when you've got some currency, not your starting character. Starting off with the Widow Hail, this is a main part of the build, quite build enabling for us, with the Quiver. The Widow Hail I crafted myself, so it was free. But one similar to this sells for about 200 exalts at the moment. I'm not sure what the price will be at the time of upload. The Quiver I bought for 1 divine. For suffixes, the options are quite heavily contested. I went with, you have to go with projectile skills, that's the most mandatory one, which leaves 2 open suffixes for you to choose, and they're generally between crit chance, crit damage bonus, and dex. I decided to go with double crit. If you do decide to go with dex, you can change your skill tree around a bit. It would enable you to not have to invest into some points that provide attributes. For the helm, we're using this helm here called the Smiling Knight Cowled Helm. It is a 1 exalt helm. I bought 3 of them and corrupted all 3 and used the one that got the double sockets. Using it mainly for the one line there at the bottom. Aggravate bleeding on targets you critically hit with attacks. Combined with critical weakness from Eye of Winter, and with the critical chance bonus from our Quiver, we have a decent amount of crit, so we nearly always aggravating our bleed on attack. Next, I've got a level 0 robe with 3 things. I could probably do better for level 91. I corrupted it with the 3rd socket, and I put all Chaos Res Soul Cores in there. This was particularly big, because it means with the Chaos Resistance Poison Vial you get from the campaign, I only had to get Chaos Resistance on 1 other piece of armor to cap, which made buying the rest of my gear a lot cheaper. This belt I bought for like 30 exalts, I think. With the belt, you want to prioritize flask charges gained per second like this, or increased flask charges gained. You can also get increased flask charges gained as a suffix, and it's kind of seen as a junk suffix most of the time, so it is pretty easy to get that with double resistances. Then you'd want max life. Boots, ideally, you want 30% move speed with whatever resistances, life, mana, dex. If you want to get rarity on your boots, they do become a lot more expensive. If you want to go 25% movement speed instead, you're then able to fit double resistances plus rarity on the boots for somewhat more affordable price, but a 30% move speed boot with double res and rarity is quite expensive. I think I spent like 10 exalts on these. Gloves, I got max life, mana, then rarity, lightning res, and mana leech. Bleeding Concoction is a physical attack, so leech is very usable for us, which is great. You definitely want to have mana leech on either your gloves or one of your rings. I think these gloves also cost me around 10 exalted, I'm pretty sure. My rings I used to fill up my resistances. I got rarity on both with max life and evasion. I believe this ring cost me something like 50x and this one was like 30 or 40. Or maybe this one was 20, I can't really remember. For the amulet, you want to have +3 to level of all projectile skills, although that is quite expensive. So find one with the +3 level to projectile skills and just whatever other stats you can find that's within your price range. I went with some energy shield and life on this one. This one cost me like 30 or 40 exalts, I believe. Also for mapping, if you want to get one like this, which has +2 to the level of projectile skills, and a lot more stats on it, and a lot more rarity, you can get that for a lot cheaper. I think this was like 30 or 40 exalts, or maybe it was 50, I can't really remember. But you can use that one for mapping when you don't need as much damage. For flasks, you have 3 choices. One is increased charges gained, like this one here. The next is gains a set amount of charges per second, and then the third is a % increased amount of charges. This is really individual to the gear you have set up and the build you have. And your preferences as well. I like using the increased charges gained. For me, with Alchemist Boon, I get more charges per second than the flat amount. Without Alchemist Boon, this will grant me more charges per second. And early on, I used the increased charges gained, but after playing around with both, I did end up liking the recharge a bit more. But there is no wrong option here. Overall, the build isn't insanely expensive, but it's certainly not budget. With all that, I'm capped on all resistances, have around 1k life, 1k mana, 3.7, nearly 3.8k energy shield. I found this to be a nice sweet spot for toughness and damage, and there are some very easy changes you can make in the skill tree if you feel like you are lacking in a particular area. For ascendancy point allocations, when I started this character, I got Traveler's Wisdom first for the 6 skill points, then I got Bleeding Concoction second, then I didn't actually get my 3rd and 4th ascendancy points until I was level 90, didn't really need them, but then I got them on the one run, and I'd say the priority for those would be Connected Chemistry 3rd, and then Running Assault 4th, and if you prefer, you could spec out of Running Assault and go into Enduring Elixirs. Because we are running Eternal Youth, our life flasks actually recover our energy shield, and our life recharges like energy shield. So we would get some benefit from that if you do mash your life flasks, because they wouldn't queue. They just stack on top of each other. Onto the skill tree. Start off with the projectile damage nodes here. They do offer quite a bit of damage for us. To this point here, where we get Honed Instincts, all these stats are useful for us. The dexterity attributes, attack speed, and projectile speed is a pseudo defensive stat, because the faster our missiles go, the faster things die. And if we can catch them, that's great for us. We'll then fork off to the most important cluster for us on the entire tree, which is Master Fletching and its surrounding nodes. And these grant increased bonuses gained from Equipped Quiver, which is like our Widow's Hail. Get a huge benefit from that. Then we path up the skill tree, because the top of the skill tree is good and the bottom is bad, through the monk starting area, getting more attributes, movement speed, defensive stats, evasion, and max energy shield. More attributes and attack speed. Up these crit nodes here, which grant us damage if we're done crit, and just crit chance. Crit cluster here, and we'll get to this point here, which we will fork off again into 2 different directions. Firstly, I'd recommend heading up, grabbing Eternal Youth, then going to the outside of the skill tree, pathing down and grabbing this crit cluster here. A lot of high value nodes with attributes, and this node here, which adds a flat 1% crit chance to our attacks. Concoction spells are unarmed, so we would benefit from Flurry as well, gaining 20% increased unarmed attack speed. There's also a crit cluster here with Throat Seeker to get. Additionally, pathing up, we go through this huge crit cluster here, where it has lots of attributes for us and lots of high value close together crit nodes. Going through, getting some more defensive stats, heading up, getting these physical damage and crit damage nodes, which is great for us, and some strength on there too. Heading up along the outside of the tree again, grabbing all these spots for our jewels, and grabbing Ingenuity for more stats for us, and this huge energy shield node here with Patient Barrier. Following along the side, we will grab Enhanced Barrier, which is more energy shield and the 1% to max resistances. This cluster here, which is physical damage and magnitude of bleeding. And then we will head down to Mind Over Matter. Now, our concoction spells do not use mana. Our Eye of Winter does, our Vulnerability does, but we only cast them every now and then. So Mind Over Matter is good for us. It's an extra barrier over our life. And because we are using a physical attack spell and we have Leech, we get our mana back quite quickly. So it's that extra protective layer, and we don't have to worry about our mana at all, and it comes back quite frequently, quite fast. Also with Energy Shield, we don't have to worry about Energy Shield recovery rate. So with something like Patient Barrier here, where we have a slower start of Energy Shield recharge, or our Energy Shield recovery rate's quite slow, because of Eternal Youth, we don't actually recharge our energy shield anyways. So that's just all on our life flask, and we have lots of bonuses to our life flask as a Pathfinder. So we don't have to worry about that. We can just invest purely into straight up increased max energy shield, which is great. Other notable points, I think that's it as far as mandatory ones. Now, as far as variation goes, there are a couple of different options you can go with. It is quite modular. So if you would like to be a bit more tanky, you can spec out of, I'll just go to Doyani here. You can spec out of these damage nodes at this point here, and you can put them into this evasion and energy shield cluster here. And even maybe like that one up there. Get nearly 5k. If you desire, if you feel like you want a bit of extra energy shield. Also, actually wait, I'll just cancel that. You'll see your evasion pops up. Mine then goes to 51% with those. But I feel like for me, and with how the build is at the moment, I benefit more from that extra damage. So we drop to 224 on hit paper DPS, and with those nodes, it's 265. Secondly, another place where you have some options is with these nodes here. So this is the Icebreaker node, where you gain 100% of maximum energy shield as additional freeze threshold. I've chose to go with this cluster here with a stun removal charm. The stun removal charms I feel are better than the freeze charms because you can get 2 uses out of them on one go. But if you would like, you can spec out of these freeze nodes here. You can come down here and head up and grab the stun threshold is based on your energy shield instead, and then run a freezing charm, if you wish. So that's another option you have if you feel like stunning is affecting you more than freezing. For me, I feel like freezing would catch me off guard more often than stuns, so that's why I'm preferring to run a stun charm and the freeze resistance. I believe that is all with these nodes. Oh, actually, one last thing. With allocating on my amulet, I have chosen to allocate Relentless Vindicator, which is right here. 10% increased damage, 10% crit hit chance, and some strength and int. It is a very cheap allocation with 2 envies and paranoia. I think it's like 5 exalts in total to anoint that, so it's one of the cheapest ones, and it's pretty good value. If you did want to spend a bit more, a couple of other options I can think of are this node here, specifically for mapping. 10% increased area of effect for attacks and 20% increased area effect if you've killed recently. This would be pretty great for mapping. It does use 2 fears, which I think are like 40 exalts at the time. Bit expensive, but would be a huge amount of increased area effect. So yeah, they're the anoint options. With jewels, because my Widow Hail is at 269% and not 270%, I had to buy a 50 exalt jewel that has that little line at the bottom there that is 5% increased bonuses gained from equipped quivers. If I was at 270%, I wouldn't have had to spend 50 exalt on that one jewel. This is because at 270% is a particular breakpoint where you get an extra level from all projectile skills on your quiver. The rest of the jewels, I got stats similar to this: increased crit damage, bonus for attacks, projectile damage, increased magnitude of damaging elements you inflict with critical hits, This one, pretty much the same. This one, pretty much the same again. This one, pretty much the same again. This one has bonus to attack damage and projectile damage instead of magnitude. So it's that sort of stuff there. For mapping, I'd say overall the build plays quite well. It is pretty simple one-button gameplay most of the time. It is quite satisfying to play. You do have to aim ahead of where mobs are running and strafe around a bit. Throughout the occasional Curse and Eye of Winter, you find it particularly tanky rare. You do complete maps decently fast, but it isn't the fastest, nor is it a one-button clear the whole screen build. I'd say mapping isn't where this build particularly excels. It feels like it excels more at killing bosses than it does at clearing maps quickly. But it certainly isn't a slouch at clearing maps either. Just, I'd say, feels like more of a jack of all trades build. I've been able to clear maps with any combination of affixes so far, except I do find with my particular setup that if a map has monsters have increased stun, it is a little bit scary if I wasn't playing perfectly or if I run into a mob that surrounded me. Also, reduced recovery and less flask charges gained don't break a waystone, but it does make it a little bit slower to complete and progress. You'd have to head back to camp a bit and fill up, but they're more annoyances than anything. Really, the easiest time is against map bosses. They do get pumped super quick and they're never an issue. Also, I was able to fight a few pinnacle encounters for the first time with this build. I got my first Xesht kill, which was really exciting, and on my first attempt too. I was also able to kill Zarokh, the temporal, for the first time on my first attempt for my 4th ascendancy point. I made quite a few mistakes during the fight, but thankfully the build is resilient enough. It didn't completely punish me and brick the run, and I was able to get it for the first time. Also, I was able to beat the Trialmaster as well for the first time, but unfortunately, unlike the Xesht kills and Zarokh kills, he did insta-kill me on my first attempt. But thankfully, quickly after that, I was able to get revenge and kill him quite easily. All I had to do was not walk in the big slam he does, obviously. But yeah, I'm pretty happy with how Bleeding Concoction turned out. It definitely feels capable in all the different facets of the game you'd want a build to be capable in. But with that being said, Bleeding Concoction does feel like it is a couple of steps behind the other Concoction builds from what I've seen. The only advantage it has is its synergy with Leech. Otherwise, I believe if you're someone who does like to play fodder builds, I'd recommend going with Poison Concoction. There are a lot of great guides out there for Poison Concoction. I was inspired to actually try and make my own version of a concoction build after watching Kai, Path of Exile's Poison Concoction build. So props to him. Future plans with the build, I might try and figure out a version that utilizes Exploit Weakness. And if Grimfeast does get nerfed, probably commit to a full Mind Over Matter build with a larger mana pool and more mana leech. But at the moment, with how the game is, I'm happy with how the build's performing. My next plan at the moment will probably be stepping away from Trade League for my next character and doing a SSF playthrough. I also want to try and get a stream up and running, so if you have any questions you can ask me live. Keep an eye out for that. Have a look at links in the description. Hopefully I'll have them there when this goes up. I'll also have any build planners that I make in the description as well, with the skill tree setup and the gems I'm using and the gear I have. But yeah, if you have any questions, certainly leave a comment. I'll try to get back to you as best I can. And if you enjoyed the video, please hit subscribe and I'll catch you next time.
You possess a modicum of skill, were it only enough. Wither it nothing. Rid yourself of your illusions. The hour grows late. The sands of time wait for no one. A small victory